good morning, and welcome. Welcome here, welcome there, welcome everywhere where you're tuning in to join this service with all of us. I also wonder how many will walk in at 11 a.m. So I hope that you brought a huge appetite, because otherwise we'll have some soup left over. Thank you all for contributing to making the service possible. You are important, and we are grateful to you. So, let me begin with a true story. Louis McGee was born in 1893. He was the son of a former slave. He went to seminary and became a Methodist Episcopal minister. And he joined the Army chaplaincy. He served in the First World War, and then he served in the Second World War in the Army as a chaplain. Just before the Second World War, he was ministering a congregation, loved the people, but realized that he was disillusioned with the theology. Many of you are here today because of that same reason. You went somewhere, you got disillusioned with the theology, and then you find Unitarian Universalism. So he also did his research, find Unitarianism, decided that he aligns with it, he resonates with it, and then he was one of the first black Unitarian ministers ordained. This is a true story. Nothing wrong with it. It's true. It's factual. It also supports our overall movement, yeah? So we want to be inclusive. We want to be supportive. We are on the side of love, on the side of change, of progress. And of course, he was one of our first black Unitarian ministers. Now let me tell you the whole story. This is a true story. Let me tell you the whole story. He was born in 1893, Louis McGee, went to seminary, became a Methodist Episcopal minister, served in the First World War as an army chaplain. Then he served some congregations in between the First and the Second World War, and he became disillusioned with the theology, loved the people. So he did his research and found Unitarianism, and he thought, oh, I resonate with this. I am going to become a Unitarian minister. So he went to the Unitarian powers to be, and he said, here I am, a trained minister. This is where I went to school. I want to become a Unitarian minister. And the powers to be said, oh, well, wouldn't that be nice? You know, we are aware that really this is a very white movement, and we are aware that we really should have at least one black congregation, but we don't. We don't really have mixed congregations either, and we are aware that obviously we should have black ministers. And so thank you for applying. However, we feel that it would be tremendously unfair to you if we ordained you into fellowship and then we could give you no work. Because where would we send you? There's no black congregation. There's no white congregation who needs a black minister. So thank you, but no thank you. This is part of the whole story. And the thing about truth it's a strange thing, because sometimes arguments that sound very reasonable aren't necessarily true. And very often, the truth sounds very unreasonable. So, arguments are strange because arguments that sound very reasonable aren't necessarily true. And the truth, very often, isn't reasonable. Let me give you an example. Gandhi. Gandhi, dressed in his white loincloth, and the thing over his shoulder, asks for an appointment with the representatives of the great British Empire. And he shows up in this house of power and might to meet with the representatives, politicians of the great British Empire who had been ruling India for so long. And he shows up and he's led into this room that speaks of nothing but might and power. All the Brits dressed to a T in their suits, him in his loincloth, in the outfit of his fellow Indian citizens. And he sits down with them, looks at them, and tells them, "You must go." Truth that sounded completely unreasonable. They laughed at him, they ridiculed him, and they walked him out, and then made fun of him for daring to show up at all, daring to show up in his little white loincloth. And oh, how history repeats itself. Truth that sounded completely unreasonable. And we all know today, from the hindsight of history, how that worked out. Louis McGee was turned down, goes to the Second World War, where he serves, and there he is in Belgium. The bombs are falling. He is scared for his life. And so many of us, when we come to face our mortality, when we are not at all sure that the next day will be granted to us, somehow we tend to get a clarity that we might not have had without. So there he is in Belgium. Bombs are falling. He's not at all sure he's going to make it. Yet he gains a clarity, and out of that clarity comes a resolve. When I go home, I will become a Unitarian minister. I'll do whatever it takes to become a Unitarian minister. So he does come home. He marries the daughter of a prominent, wealthy black man from Chicago. Goes to the Lombard School of Theology, and then he establishes a church on the south side of Chicago. And most of his congregants are black, some Japanese, few whites, but mostly black. That's a church that still exists today. And so he ministers there. He starts this congregation, but then he wants to move on. He's ready to explore. He applies at the congregation in Flint, Michigan. And they're very impressed with his preaching. They're very impressed with what he brings. But in the end, he did not get the 2/3 of votes that were necessary. And was it because he was black? He does not give up, and then eventually he becomes the senior minister of a congregation in California, and fully ordained. and about several decades later than he first decided to become a Unitarian minister. That is the whole story, or a more wholesome story. Because, things are messy. Progress is messy. Change is messy. So, sure, our movement tends in a direction of inclusivity. What is at the core of our movement? It's love. What is at the core of our movement? It's love. So we tend in that direction. But our movement is filled with people like you and me. And we have ideas. And then we have blind spots. And those blind spots get a voice. And so the progress becomes zigzaggy, becomes difficult. And we'd love to say that we've always stood on the side of love, that we've always stood on the side of progress, that my apologies. We've always stood on the side of progress, and we just haven't until we did. So it's messy. And especially when we find ourselves in times of tremendous turmoil, the messiness becomes more obvious. So there we are today, in a turmoil like never before. And we are messy. The whole progress is messy. As we're trying to figure out which foot to put forward, how should we step, in which direction. So it becomes messy. And then in messiness, we can do two things. And we find our way eventually to that which is at the core of our movement, which is what? It's love. But first, we will explore the many facets of judgment and judgmentalism. So at the core of our movement is love. Let's remember that. Let's also expect the messiness, because we are human beings and we don't always walk step in step with one another. But at the core is love. It is love that has to show us the way. And the powers to be, those who want to rule with fear, shaming, humiliation, and oppression, fear love because they can't control it. Orwell, 1984. They fear love because they can't control it. So what does love look like in times like this? It looks like you saving the phone number of your representative into your phone and then call. And then, do you know yet how many of you have called? Yeah, look, and wonderful. We still have work to do. Call. Call about issues that you care about. Do you know yet which staffer of your representative is responsible for what issues? Do you? If you don't, you have homework to do. Figure it out. Call. Be loud. Call. Then, when it is time to go in the streets, go in the streets, because as love would have it, we are the people who listen to the ones who are first threatened. And right now, those are our Hispanic brothers and sisters, their children. So we listen to that, we pay attention to that, and then we stand up, and as love would have it, we protect them. So what the Unitarian Universalist Association did, and all its 1,000-member churches, along with other denominations, sued the government for restricting our right to give refuge to our Hispanic immigrant brothers and sisters. So we got to sue. We got to make our love-filled voice very loud, very present all the time. When it's time to go into the streets, sometimes love looks like that. Those are our streets. We walk into our streets to give voice to our desire, that we do not agree with the government that is cruel, that we want a fair, a kind government that seeks peace, that seeks to treat all people kindly, with justice, with inclusivity, equity. That's what we stand for. Because in the end, if everything is stripped away from us, our bank accounts, our homes, if somebody came today and took everything away from you, what would you have left? Your choices. That's all you got to look at. Your choices. The issues that you empowered, the issues that you didn't give your full attention to, your choices. So don't get bogged down with the economy. Don't get bogged down with things that don't matter. But pay attention to what really matters. And that's how we treat one another, how we treat all of life, how we treat this environment, and give your wholehearted love to that. And then let that love inspire and direct you to the choices that you can live with. To the choices that when everything is stripped away from you, you can say, I'm proud of that. I stood in principle. I lived my values. I stood for love. When Pat read that poem, I felt like I was so moved. I don't know about you, but I was just moved at a very core, at the core of my being. Because it's true. At least half of our world is cruel and not good. And we keep that from our children. Because, of course, we want them to have hope and a possibility for the future. So let us all remember that at the core of our movement is love. And that the process right now, it's messy, and it might be a little bit zigzaggy, but in the end, we will find our way. And today I stand here and I talked to you about Louis McGee, a man who died in 1979, a long time ago. And then I look back at it, and I gave you a true story, and then I gave you the whole story. The true story sounds really good. The whole story is messy. Now I know that years from now, there will be another minister at another pulpit. Maybe she will be a black trans woman. And she will look back and she will give a talk. And she will say, I'll give you a true story. And then let me give you the whole story. And the true story will definitely point in the right direction. It will show the way of love. And the whole story will be closely aligned to it. And that's because of our choices today. So may we create a world and leave a world for our children a world with good bonds. And so it is.